There wasn't a species in the galaxy that wanted to deal with the humans. That wasn't to say they avoided them. Quite the opposite. Humans were in demand, wanted on every station, sought after in every tech sector, given first access to trade hubs and salvage permits, respected, no, feared. Not because they were warlike. Quite the opposite. Humans rarely fought. They were by and large cheerful, unassuming, overly informal merchants with coffee addictions and sarcastic smiles. They didn't posture, didn't make demands, didn't issue threats. That's what made them terrifying. You never saw them coming, you never saw them angry, and no one ever saw them lose. The joke in galactic engineering circles was, give a human a box of mismatched parts in a week, and they'll hand you back a planetary extinction weapon that also makes toast. Everyone laughed quietly. It started with their technicians, those scruffy, oil-stained freaks who treated alien starships like Lego kits and gravitational lenses like soup spoons. Give them access to a junk pile and a toolkit, and they'd leave behind something that violated 6 treaties in 3 dimensions. The Kalari once tried to copy a Terran-built distortion drive. It turned their moon inside out. There were no survivors. Humans called it tinkering. The rest of the galaxy called it madness. And it wasn't just their machines. Human language was elastic, their culture unpredictable, and their ethics seemed to vary depending on what kind of music was playing. They didn't plan wars. They solved problems. Sometimes those problems were hostile battle fleets. Sometimes those problems were rival corporations. Sometimes it was boredom. No one ever really figured out how they rose so fast. One minute they were a backwater species discovering fusion power and throwing satellites into their own orbital paths. The next they'd figured out how to fold space, not bought the technology, not begged for it, invented it. 100 years after developing fold tech, they started trading for jump point coordinates, already able to reach every corner of the known galaxy. They didn't ask for permission. They didn't need invitation. They simply showed up, offered excellent prices on rare minerals, and fixed things that hadn't worked in decades. Entire civilizations with aging infrastructure hired Terrans to refurbish their systems. That's how it always started. They'd show up with cargo freighters made from a dozen different species scrap, patchwork monstrosities that look like junkers, half held together with epoxy and swearing. Then they'd offload goods no one else could synthesize, restore derelict defense platforms in a weekend, and leave behind blueprints even the creators couldn't decipher. It was said they didn't follow blueprints. They followed vibes. To humans, the laws of physics were just suggestions. No one knew what their government structure was. Half the time they claimed to be unified. Half the time they argued about pizza toppings like it was geopolitics. One ambassador said it best. Trying to understand Terran diplomacy is like trying to debug a volcano. You can study it, but eventually it just explodes. Still, most of the galaxy was content to let Earth play its little merchant games. Better that than provoke them. There was an uneasy peace held together by caffeine, trade agreements, and the silent fear that if you made a Terran angry, you would live long enough to regret what you'd done wrong. Then came the rumors. Ghost signals on battlefields. Entire pirate fleets vanishing without distress calls. Weapons that didn't fire projectiles or beams, just turned ships into fine black powder. A mining rig in neutral space, supposedly hijacked by Terrans, re-emerged 2 weeks later with a new mass driver that could crack moons. No explanation, no request for patents, just a shrug and a, "We were bored." They weren't conquerors. They were problem solvers with no emotional brakes and an uncomfortable interest in plasma implosion. Which is why when the Triad worlds decided to act, most species looked the other way. The Krill Nox, the Zohari swarm, and the Meldari ascendancy had always considered themselves apex civilizations, old bloodlines, ancient fleets, billions of warriors. For centuries, they had squabbled amongst themselves, flexing their fleets and engaging in glorious combat while ignoring the upstart merchant race at the edge of the spiral arm. But fear festers, especially when it's the quiet kind. The final straw came when a Terran salvage crew accidentally rebuilt an ancient dreadnought using parts from all 3 Triad civilizations. They didn't mean to insult anyone. The crew had named the monstrosity Daisy and flown it for 2 weeks before selling it to a mining guild. The Meldari took it as sacrilege. The Zohari declared it an act of cultural theft. The Krillnoks didn't say anything. They just called a war council. 3 weeks later, 3 vast fleets launched simultaneously. The plan was simple: strike Terra, hit key colonies, destroy the infrastructure, steal their tech, and eliminate the Terran threat before it could destabilize the balance of power. The humans wouldn't see it coming. The galaxy watched in silent horror. They streamed the whole thing, every angle, every system, every ship, real time, no filters. This was going to be a message to the entire galactic community. Humanity is not untouchable. Millions watched. Billions held their breath. And on the day of the strike, every fleet opened fire on Terran targets simultaneously. Across 23 systems, sensors lit up with every kind of weapon signature the Triad possessed. Fusion lances, graviton torpedoes, mass disruptors, firepower capable of vaporizing cities, melting continents, and shattering moons, all hurled toward Earth and its colonies. And that's when they realized the humans had been expecting it. From orbit, Terra looked serene. Blue oceans, swirling clouds, a few orbital stations lazily rotating along equatorial drift lanes. No defense platforms, no weapon arrays, just civilian traffic and soft planetary emissions, a whisper of background chatter, commerce, and low-frequency jazz. The Krillnoks fleet arrived first. 30 dreadnoughts, 40 cruisers, and a few hundred support craft. War beasts, all of them, adorned with ritual scars and hull-carved kill tallies. They spread across the Terran sky like a dark crown, charged their primary lances, and waited for the signal. They didn't wait long. Mars lit up with flashes of Zohari disruptor fire, green pulses detonating against its upper atmosphere in sheets of light. Simultaneously, the Meldari fleet, further out near the Saturn colonies, began deploying quantum dissonance shells. On the surface of each world, millions of humans looked up and paused, not in fear, in mild irritation. At precisely 8:02 Universal Time Coordinated, Terra's atmosphere lit up. The Krillnoks fired everything. The lances first, punching in at near light speeds. Then came the heavy torpedoes, each one the size of a small building. Fusion detonations rippled across a shield boundary that until that moment no one knew existed. There was no counter-fire, no panic, no alarms, just absorption. The lances didn't bounce. The torpedoes didn't explode. Instead, the energy bent inward, spiraled around invisible seams, and vanished. From across the galaxy, the attack was being broadcast in ultra-definition, 32 channels, full system telemetry, real-time emotional monitoring. The Triad forces had wanted to humiliate humanity in front of everyone. They wanted to prove that firepower and history still ruled the stars. The feeds did not show human cities exploding. They showed humming. The Zohari commander on the Ganymede orbital flagship was the first to realize something was wrong. Their spores were designed to strip an atmosphere in minutes. Yet, the Ganymede colony hadn't even flickered. No defensive maneuvers, no shields dropping, no atmospheric leaks, just music, a low, pulsing bassline. Back on Earth, inside a long-forgotten mountain range, a technician scratched his chin and muttered, "Huh." He adjusted a dial. "Central," he said over comms. "Looks like the absorption rate's peaking at 97%. We can bounce it back, or we could get spicy." A voice responded, calm and amused. "Spicy, please." "Copy that." At 8:04 Universal Time Coordinated, Earth glowed. Just a little. Then it screamed. The energy unleashed wasn't a discharge. It was a mirror, perfectly tuned to every origin signal. What went out matched what came in, ×5, just to make a point. Each Triad ship watched in horror as the same weapons they'd fired were returned in perfect sync. Same angle, same velocity, amplified beyond safe tolerance. On board the Krillnoks flagship, Admiral Ziegler had just enough time to scream before the reflected lance carved through his command deck. One ship vanished, then 10, then hundreds. In the outer systems, Meldari commanders tried to flee. They reversed engines, dumped reactor cores, and scattered. Too slow. The quantum dissonance shells they had fired toward the Martian basin hadn't even made it halfway before turning bright silver and spinning back toward them, twisting through dimensional layers like boomerangs made of math and hate. 30 ships winked out of existence mid-broadcast. No explosions, just silence. The Zohari did better. Their biological ships pulsed with frantic hormonal shifts, their hive leaders pumping panic through the pheromone ducts. They tried to cloak, to dive, to escape through fold rifts. No use. Ganymede's return fire wasn't energy. It was code. A viral pulse designed to ride the neural net of the swarm's ship brains and rewrite their instincts. The ships turned on each other. The last thing anyone saw of the Zohari fleet was a tangled, twitching mass of flesh and metal devouring itself in orbit before descending, still screaming, into Jupiter's storm bands. The Galactic broadcast cut to static for 3 full minutes. Nothing but black. Then a single news signal appeared. No visuals, just audio. A woman's voice, human, calm, dry, like she just stepped out of a coffee break. This incursion is logged. Retaliation has begun. And then silence. Back across the galaxy, on the capital world of the Confederation Council, representatives stared in stunned disbelief. Some whispered prayers. Others watched the looping footage of the Triad fleets being erased from reality, and quietly deleted their own contingency plans labeled, "In case of Terran hostility." One ambassador, pale and shaking, turned to his aide and whispered, "Did they even lose a single ship?" "No, sir." "Did they fire anything first?" "No, sir." "Did they even blink?" "I don't believe they did." On Terra, the human network stayed silent. No speeches, no press releases, no gloating. They didn't need to. The message had been delivered in every language, every frequency, every spectrum. You strike first, we erase you last. Terra didn't hold press conferences. They didn't issue ultimatums. They didn't even blink. 3 triad civilizations had just burned themselves against a planetary defense system that up until that day had been theoretical. The fact that it worked wasn't surprising. The fact that it had worked perfectly without a single casualty was. That wasn't defense. That was a field test. Now it was time for the real show. Aboard the abrasive negotiator, Admiral June Kazan sipped her tea. She sat in a cockpit made of alloy, attitude, and a suspicious amount of chrome. Her crew waited. Nobody asked what came next. This wasn't a debate. It was a checklist. 3 targets, she said. 3 strikes. All clean, all final. The bridge lights dimmed aboard the negotiator. The mood wasn't grim. It was surgical, focused. Deploy the teams, Kazan said. Unleash the engineers. Operation Daisy Chain. Target, Krill Nox Prime. The Krill Nox had never been defeated in ground combat. Their cities were carved into tectonic fault lines, guarded by active crust movers and orbital mass drivers. The surface of their homeworld could liquefy in minutes. Humanity didn't send an army. They sent Dr. Milo Pendergast and a crate of calibrated spatial anchors. The Rust Blossom, a Terran science vessel disguised as a garbage hauler, jumped into the Krill Nox system and dropped its payload in a spiral pattern around the system's sun. Anchors ignited. Fold space began to invert. The Krill Nox detected the anomaly. Too late. Their sensors screamed. Then their sun disappeared, folded into a self-collapsing loop. The star's mass was squeezed into a black knot of reality and reborn as a microquasar. Energy flared. Time broke. Every Krill Nox ship and system was crushed by gravitational slingshot before they could react. And Krill Nox Prime? Gone. Just gone. All that remained was a violet hole in the sky and the echo of someone, somewhere, saying, "Oops. Operation Bug Bomb. Target, the Zohari hive world." The Zohari weren't just one species. They were a biome. Their ships lived, bred, and died like spores in a wind tunnel. Their worlds pulsed with organic heat. Their minds were linked across neural relay towers that extended from planetary crust to orbital lattices. You didn't fight the Zohari with weapons. You fought them with bad ideas. Terran bioengineers dropped a single probe into their central ocean hive. Just one. Inside was a DNA string, completely synthetic, that mimicked the swarm's reproductive command signal. But it wasn't. It was a loop. An instruction set that told every spore in the Zohari hive. Duplicate endlessly. Now it worked too well. Within hours, their oceans boiled with uncontrolled growth. Towers melted under the weight of their own spawn. Ships burst from overdevelopment. The hive mind shattered as feedback loops collapsed. From orbit, it looked like their planet had developed cancer and then detonated from the inside out. No survivors, no trace, just a floating cloud of steaming mycelium the size of a continent. Operation Mirrorball. Target: Meldari Ascendancy. The Meldari believed in probability control. Their tech was clean, precise, and coldly beautiful. So was their doctrine. Disrupt enemy causality, rewrite engagement outcomes, and win before battle begins. Humanity had no interest in disrupting probability. They just rewrote the ending. A team of Terran stealth vessels, each piloted by a math-obsessed dropout with criminal records and a chip on their shoulder, entered Meldari orbit under cloak. Their mission: plant temporal reflectors in the planet's ionosphere. Once charged, those reflectors did something no Meldari system could counter. They fed their future back into their present. For exactly 22 seconds, every Meldari civilian, soldier, and AI saw what was coming. They saw themselves die. They saw the weapons that would strike them. The fire, the screams, the exact moment their world cracked. And then it happened. No time to escape, no time to resist, just confirmation. Their fleet vaporized in formation. Their planetary shield grid overloaded and atomized. Their central AI tried to scream a ceasefire across comms, but by the time the message reached Terra, there was no one left to receive a reply. By the end of Day 3, all 3 civilizations had been erased from the galactic map. The Confederation Council issued an emergency declaration. The Terran War Response Protocol is not warfare. It is consequence. No demands were issued from Earth. No negotiations, no apologies, no peace treaty, just silence. And 3 fewer stars in the sky. It took less than a week for the galaxy to lose its mind. 3 ancient empires burned down to bedrock. No survivors, no war crimes, no negotiations, just a neat little row of scorched systems and a single line in the Terran incident log. Response concluded. No one officially said it was Earth, but no one had to. The way the strikes were executed, clean, final, efficient, wasn't a calling card. It was a fingerprint. A greasy, smirking, coffee-stained fingerprint in the middle of what used to be 3 sovereign star systems. The Confederation Council convened in crisis. Species that hadn't spoken in centuries suddenly found common ground under the flickering horror of the broadcast archives. Everyone had a theory. The Yelton theorized Terrans were a rogue AI experiment gone wrong. The Lascari believed Earth had made a pact with pre-spacefaring old ones buried beneath their crust. The Baranthians proposed that Terrans didn't invent spacefold, they just stole it from someone we haven't met yet and killed them too. None of it mattered. What mattered was this: Terra didn't bluff. They smiled. They traded. They sold you things you didn't need in boxes you couldn't open. And if you crossed them, they erased you with all the emotional investment of unplugging a microwave. The new consensus: let them be. Back on Earth, the orbital dry dock around Earth was unusually loud. Clanks echoed through the superstructure as 36 mechanics argued over a fusion stabilizer. At least 2 of them were holding coffee mugs while welding, and one appeared to be using a plasma cutter as a pointer in an argument about whether or not a gravitonic recoil dampener should smell like maple syrup. "You guys see the footage?" grunted Tasha, wiping grease on her cheek. "Of course," said Danny, grinning as he jimmied a neutron valve with a crowbar. "Hell of a light show. You know, if you crank the gain on the Meldari meltdown clip, you can hear someone in the background singing Ring of Fire." "Did you hear what the Krillnox called us?" laughed another. "Scrap monkeys. I'm keeping that." They weren't soldiers. They weren't leaders. They were technicians, engineers, freelancers with bad tempers and worse impulse control. And somehow they just reset the galactic power structure from a maintenance bay. In the center of it all, a new freighter was being assembled. Didn't look like much, a long, spiny hulk with a dozen mismatched engines, 5 cargo bays, and external plating that looked like it had been salvaged from a prison riot. And under one of the tarps, something that glowed when it was angry. On the hull, someone had spray-painted the ship's name in neon green, the Thing. Elsewhere, in a very nervous galaxy, trade embassies were being hastily reopened. Terran cargo routes were given permanent priority status. No inspections, no delays, no taxation. Every major civilization updated its navigation protocols to label Earth space as Type 0 restricted, a designation previously reserved for collapsing stars and live dimensional rifts. Some worlds took it further. Planetary religions restructured their pantheons to include the mad ones from Terra as wrathful deities. A children's cartoon on Caltri 7 featured a heroic human with goggles and a chainsaw who saved planets by accidentally breaking everything until it worked. It became the most watched show in galactic history. And somewhere in the dark reaches of uncharted space, something watched the humans. Something old, something powerful, something amused, because it understood what the rest of the galaxy was just learning. Humanity was not dominant because they were violent. They were dominant because they were insane enough to treat reality like a sandbox. They didn't conquer the galaxy. They rewrote it to their skill set. Final transmission. A galactic news anchor, clearly sweating under their carapace, stared into the camera and read from the prompter with trembling claws. In conclusion, the Terran retaliation has ceased. Casualty estimates remain absolute. The Confederation strongly urges all civilizations to maintain friendly trade relations and refrain from provoking the Terran species. We also remind viewers that a sudden power flicker interrupted the feed. A new image filled the screen. A human engineer waving, half covered in soot with sparks flying in the background. Hey, just patching your relay grid. You were sending static through half the sector. Anyway, you're good now. Love the outfit. Carry on. Then they winked. The feed cut to black. Galactic consensus updated again. This has been HFY Sage of Stars, bringing you tales from the edge of human space. Remember, we don't conquer the stars. We just convince them to cooperate. Stay safe out there, and whatever you do, don't make us fix your infrastructure.